Woke Supremacy News.
Hi there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York. A stunning Labor Day court ruling has left the DOJ's investigation into the twice impeached ex-president's handling of government documents at a temporary crossroads. All eyes are now on what prosecutors do next after Judge Aileen Cannon granted the ex-president's request for a special master to review the materials seized in the August 8th search of Mar-a-Lago and barred DOJ from using those documents for its probe until the special master is done. In a ruling that has been almost universally panned by legal experts, Judge Cannon expresses deep concern about any potential harm to Donald Trump that could emerge from the search of his private residence, saying she was, quote, mindful of the need to ensure at least the appearance of fairness and integrity under the extraordinary circumstances presented. She adds this, quote, as a function of plaintiff's former position as president of the United States, the stigma associated with the search and seizure is in a league of its own. A future indictment based to any degree on property that ought to be returned would result in reputational harm of a decidedly different order of magnitude. New York Times points this out, quote, her rulings seem to carve out a special exception to the normal legal process for the former president and reject the Justice Department's implicit argument that Trump be treated like any other investigative subject. There are significant questions on how her new ruling will work, especially since the special master is permitted to review documents based on Trump's claims of executive privilege. They're claims that have been rejected by the current head of the executive branch. That would be President Joe Biden. Once again, from the Times reporting, quote, after trying for months to get the documents back from Trump, the National Archives, the agency that safeguards presidential records, told his lawyers in a letter in May that both the Justice Department and the Biden White House did not believe the former president's executive privilege claims had merit. At a hearing last week concerning the question, the Justice Department argued that allowing a special master to conduct an executive privilege review of the seized material would be, quote, unprecedented and legally baseless since the department itself is part of the current executive branch and Trump is no longer in office. Politico is reporting this on the overall impact of the ruling, quote, it seems likely that the process could delay by weeks or months the government's investigation, which a prosecutor recently said is in its early stages. But a DOJ official tells NBC News that it does not halt the probe entirely, since investigators still have access to documents reviewed by the archives in January or the classified material handed over by Trump's attorneys in June. And it does not stop the FBI from talking to witnesses or pursuing the big questions at hand, including how did the documents end up at Mar-a-Lago in the first place, and why? Why weren't all the documents handed over to the National Archives? And what was Donald Trump's involvement in the handling of all these records? It's where we start today with some of our most favorite reporters and friends. Former U.S. Attorney and MSNBC legal analyst Joyce Vance is here. Also joining us, NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley. And with us on set for the hour, former Senator Claire McCaskill. All three MSNBC contributors. So how bad is the ruling, Ryan Riley? It's so bad Bill Barr doesn't like it. Let me show you that. With that, because I think it's a baseline. This isn't the left freaking out that there's a delay in the criminal investigation into a twice impeached ex-president's hoarding and mishandling of classified documents. This is that this judge is so AWOL, Bill Barr thinks she's nuts. And again, for the second or third time in as many days, has reiterated the strength of the government's case. Let me just underscore that classified information was taken. Bill Barr says that isn't in dispute. They were not handled appropriately. And they're looking into evidence that they were deceived, that Donald Trump lied to the government about said documents. That is where we are.
Yeah, and I was just on the phone right before we got on the air with an expert in this area of the law, and I said, is naive the right way to describe this order? And they wouldn't quite go as far as naive, but they would say novel is a way to describe this order, because it really does just go into an area where there is no roadmap for this. Even in the Rudy Giuliani case, the special master did not end up looking at questions of executive privilege, and that's those questions of executive privilege, as Donald Trump well knows, because he sued the January 6th he sued the January 6th committee and the National Archives to try to block them from the January 6th committee from getting material related to that investigation. And the Supreme Court denied that back in January the ability for him to block those records from coming over from the National Archives. So he knows that this is all supposed to go through D.C. This is not supposed to be something that a judge in Florida is just sort of, writing on a whim necessarily here and creating this whole new precedent and this scope of potential special master duties that aren't really, there's no roadmap for. There's nothing to follow. It's not as though you can point back to something and be like, hey, here's how this is going to happen, because there just isn't an example of a case that has been handled like this. This isn't something that special masters typically do. They typically look at that more narrow question of attorney-client privilege, which, had that been handed down yesterday, I really think that's something the DOJ ultimately could have lived with. It might have been that rain delay, as Bill Barr referenced. It might have been a little bit of a setback in the investigation, but that's a matter of, a couple of weeks maybe. In this instance, when they're looking at questions of executive privilege, gosh, it's like the special master's coming into the role of a judge. It would just be really, really bizarre for that to be what would be handled, and setting aside the fact that it's going to be very difficult for them to find anyone that both sides would agree upon being the special master in this case, Nicole.
And let's drill down on Bill Barr's statements a little further. Said this anchor never, but Joyce, let's do that because of the extraordinary nature of a rebuke from someone who was viewed to have largely done Donald Trump's bidding at his time overseeing the Justice Department. This is what he says about Judge Eileen Cannon's opinion. The opinion was wrong. The government should appeal it. It's deeply flawed in a number of ways. And then he comes back to, as we just played, the fact that they were subpoenaed and never delivered. They don't have to show the content. Specific advice was given in a memo, for example, in order to prevail in this case. It's not going to change the decision. You have been scathing in your judgment of this ruling yesterday. Tell me where things stand in your view today.
Nicole, sometimes as a lawyer, as a prosecutor, you get rulings from a judge that make you angry, maybe because the judge has misinterpreted the facts or the law. This ruling initially made me angry, but the more that I've studied it, it just makes me profoundly sad, because this is a judge who does everything that she can to avoid clear law, who does everything that she can do to dismember the facts, to end up in a ruling that creates this sort of a special out for Trump. Because President Trump is really the only person to whom a ruling like this could ever apply. I think every criminal defendant who's under investigation would love to be able to file a motion after a search warrant was executed and put a pause on the investigation. But that's not the way our criminal justice system works. And Trump has a perfect remedy if he's ultimately indicted, where he can move to suppress evidence if he thinks it was wrongfully taken. Where Bill Barr, I think, hits the target here, and those are words I'm not sure I thought that I would ever say on this show or anywhere else.
I feel you.
We've certainly been critical of him, right? I mean, it does mean a lot, though. I think that this shows that the disenchantment with this ruling is really a legal matter, an appellate lawyer sort of thing, as opposed to a political matter. There are a lot of flaws with this ruling, but chief among them is the fact that she believes that executive privilege claims can be resolved using a special master. That's not how any of it works, and this process will break down, and ultimately it will just lead to a lot of delay. And DOJ is sort of damned if they do and damned if they don't. Filing an appeal in Atlanta takes a good bit of time. Maybe they can convince the Court of Appeals to expedite, but there's still time involved. You have to do all these technical things, like filing the record from the trial court, and briefing can't start until that's done. By the same token, if DOJ goes ahead with the special master process in this situation that's really not suited to resolve the claims that Trump is going to raise here, it creates a mess. So what the judge has done here, rather than speeding the administration of justice, is to delay it and to interfere with it. And I regretfully agree with the former Attorney General in this matter.
I said this last week. We will all remember where we were when Bill Barr made one of the more salient points about the special master ploy. And it clearly is that. This is, Joyce, what the Justice Department argued in the hearing on Thursday. It falls in line with the points you're making. This is Jay Bratt said that under the protocols that are proposed by the plaintiff, they would regain access to those, including potentially the former president. We have no idea where they would be stored. And again, this would be giving access to people, things they do not have the right to have access at this point in time. All for what we think is a fanciful view that somehow they would successfully be able to interpose an executive privilege objection that would prohibit the executive branch from reviewing the executive branch materials for core executive branch function. He argues how nonsensical Trump's argument is, and yet she sides with Trump. How did that happen in your view?
Well, look, every judge has to be appointed by a president from one of our political parties or the other, right? It's no one springs onto the federal bench without going through that mechanism. And so I always hesitate to criticize judges because of the party that appointed them. But here one struggles to believe that this judge could possibly not be smart enough to appreciate the issue. She's well educated. She spent 6 or 7 years in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of Miami before she went on the bench, in the Southern District of Florida, before she went on the bench as both a trial lawyer and an appellate lawyer. And so, you know, at some point you just have to be willing to call it what it is, and it's a disingenuous opinion. And the problem here that you're identifying is really a significant problem. We have documents that were created in the intelligence community, documents that are classified top secret. Revelation of those documents without authorization could do grave damage to our national security. And what is this judge going to do? Oversee a process where those are sent back to a former president who's shown he's not trustworthy, who's shown he doesn't care about national security? Why would a federal judge put the country at that level of risk? I think her opinion ultimately raises a lot of questions that we don't yet have answers to, and that may force DOJ to appeal this issue to the 11th Circuit rather than going ahead with the special master process, hoping that it would be quicker. There's some real problems here in resolving the executive privilege issues.
Well, it's not like last week someone pretending to be, who was it, a Rothschild, didn't infiltrate Mar-a-Lago. And I mean, it's not like Mar-a-Lago isn't a flashing yellow soft target for American adversaries.
Of course. And I got to tell you, it feels like to me that the judge had a pile of legal precedent and legal rules on her desk, and she went like this. Wiped them all off the desk, and then spitballed, how can we give him a win?
Why?
I don't know, because the irony is, by ignoring, I mean, let me just give you one example. I could get into the weeds of this opinion, as Joyce could, as many other lawyers that could come on your program and do, but it's complicated, and you get in the weeds quickly, and people will their eyes will roll back on their head and they'll switch channels. So I won't do that. But what I will say is let me give you one example. To enjoin the investigation, the judge has to find that the person asking for this has a high likelihood of prevailing. Well, has Trump prevailed in any court on executive privilege? No. He has not. So the idea that this judge would find that Trump has a high likelihood of prevailing on executive privilege, which she must find in order to do the injunction, it's bonkers. It's just bonkers. So in this opinion, she says she thought the appearance of fairness was very important. I got news for her. She is now the author of an opinion that just screams, this is not fair, screams this is not based on law, totally untethered from precedent and legal precedent and the law. And so it is, and she's very early in her career. I don't think she'll ever overcome this opinion in her entire career because it is so bad. I would love to talk to the clerks who work for her because I guarantee you they've had some sleepless nights over the last few nights.
And again, the disapproval of the opinion spans the ideological spectrum, Brian, from all of us to, again, Bill Barr, who has been extremely public in making clear that the government's case is sound, the government's case will likely lead to charges, and the judge's opinion is all the things Joyce and Claire say it is. And then enter I guess it's his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who seemed incapable of saying anything clear, but didn't exactly exonerate his father-in-law either. Let me show you that.
Why did the president take home top secret documents?
You have to ask him that question. But, you know, what I will say is if you look at my book, you'll see that he was under constant attack.
But he took top secret documents home, potentially risking the security of the United States.
Yeah, I think that it's something that, again, this seems like it's an issue of paperwork that should have been able to be worked out between DOJ and him. I don't know what he took or what he didn't take, but I think right now we're relying on leaks to the media, which is the same thing that
We've seen the photograph, haven't we, where it says top secret?
Yeah, like I said, I've seen a lot of allegations made by the media over my 4 years that turned out not to be true. So I think that this whole thing is actually elevated.
So the fact that we've seen photographs that say top secret document, we should wait and see whether or not they were, even though we're being told by the FBI that they were.
Yeah, like I said, I go into my book the accusations that were made of Trump.
No, if you could answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, he was the president of the United States. He had the highest clearance in the world. So I don't know if look, this may be a paperwork issue. This may be, I don't know. Like I said, I haven't been involved in the details of it.
Ryan Riley, it's not a paperwork issue. And the farcical nature of it. Let me just talk about my whittle book. Jared Kushner says the fact we've seen photographs that say secret, we should wait and see. He said, yeah, if you go to my book, the accusations that were made against Trump. Trump brings this on by refusing when it was all being done secret. Nobody knew about this. Nobody knew they were trying so hard to get classified material back. But he refused to give them to the archives, and then he refuses the secret grand jury subpoena. So the only reason any of us know about this, Jared, is because your father-in-law refused to give them back repeatedly.
That's right. You've really got to appreciate the message discipline of Jared Kushner being able to slip into book plugs into responding to questions about these top secret documents that his father-in-law had. But yeah, it really is. I mean, there hasn't been a solid explanation coming from the Trump camp for really any of this. We've heard a number of different excuses. It varies by the day what they're choosing as their latest defense. But a lot of these, I think, aren't really necessarily really believable coming from the Trump team. And the government really just did give him so many opportunities here. I really think that it seems like, based on the record that we've seen, that they were essentially trying to give an off-ramp here, right? They went in soft at first. They got the records sort of voluntarily. Then they toughened up a bit. They said, okay, let's go to this grand jury subpoena. And, they were trying to get back the documents in response to that. They were given, an envelope with some things in them that, was nothing in comparison to what they ultimately found when they searched his home in August, when they found hundreds of classified documents, even after his lawyer signed something saying that he no longer had those documents in his possession. So they really did try to give an off-ramp here, and I don't think we would see, I don't think that necessarily a case would be guaranteed or even frankly likely had Donald Trump simply complied with that initial grand jury subpoena, returned all these documents at that point, instead of obfuscating and trying to hold on to a bunch of these documents that, regardless of classification level, weren't his to keep. I think that that's something we should always keep reminding ourselves, because all of these documents belonged in the hands of the National Archives, not at Mar-a-Lago. These were the government's documents under the Presidential Records Act, Nicole.
And Joyce, we're not any closer to understanding why. Not just why he took them, why he hand-packed them, why he had a lawyer lie about the fact that first they were all in the storage room and then second that they'd all been returned. We don't have any of those answers, and neither do we have an understanding of what vehicles will exist to get to the truth around those questions. Do you agree with Bill Barr's assessment that this could be a rain delay, but we will ultimately learn the truth?
I don't think I'm prepared to go that far, because I think this is the troubling question here. The fact that we don't know. One hopes that DOJ knows more than what the public knows, because these are serious and troubling questions. There's been a lot of suggestion that harms may have already occurred from spillage of these documents. We have absolutely no way of assessing whether or not that's the case. That's now in the hands of the DNI and the intelligence community as they try to do both a classification review, seeing whether the documents are properly classified, and determining what, if any, risks exist to national security. You know, that's a little bit more than a rain delay for a couple of innings in a ball game. That is a matter of serious national gravity, which I think makes it all the more unfortunate that this judge, who purports, in her opinion, by the way, to permit that classified review and the security investigation to proceed without thinking about the fact that there are folks at DOJ, FBI folks and others who are essential players in that sort of a review. So it all sort of turns back on its head. But one thing that Barr really does get right here is his focus on the former president obstructing this investigation. You know, Nicole, we discussed, as this news was breaking, a fact we haven't heard a lot more about in DOJ's pleadings, which is that at this early point in time, late May, when folks from DOJ pay a visit to Mar-a-Lago to try to obtain some of this information, to shake it loose, they actually spend some brief period of time with the former president where he speaks with DOJ folks. And it could be that something happened in those conversations that's material on this issue of whether or not Trump was in the loop, whether he's involved in the obstruction of justice. And that obstruction may or may not give us an answer to why he took these documents in the first place, why he was so insistent on keeping them. But, you know, at the end of the day, I'm not sure it matters, because obstructing justice in an investigation like this is enough of a plus factor beyond just retaining the documents for a period of time that it would certainly justify DOJ if it decides to go ahead with a prosecution.
And again, across the spectrum, ideologically speaking, wide belief, including from Bill Barr, that on appeal the government will prevail. Are you ready to make any predictions today?
Well, that circuit, I think there are, Joyce may know this better than I do, but I think there are 11 judges. I think 6 of them were appointed by Trump. Yeah. But let's remind ourselves that there were a lot of election cases that came in front of Trump-appointed judges, and they followed the law. So just because it's a Trump judge doesn't mean that they're incapable of following the law. So I think that ultimately the executive privilege thing will fall. And by the way, talk about turn on its head. Can a court say, by the way, the executive branch is enjoined from looking at documents based on executive privilege? Oh, but this part of the executive branch can.
It's nonsensical.
I mean, there's no logic to it, other than giving Trump what he wanted. So it was a sad day, but I do think, and I do think it helps to remind, I mean, it's a little bit like us talking about Liz Cheney. I think if anyone is feeling that this is, the Democrats or this judge was right and the Democrats are wrong, go back and remind yourself what Bill Barr was to Donald Trump. He was his bag man. He overturned guilty pleas of some of the Trump inner circle. He intervened in ways politically that attorney generals didn't typically. This was not a guy who played it really close to the middle. He was a partisan attorney general for Donald Trump. The fact that he is so clear in his legal analysis that this judge is just dead wrong should make everybody on the right scratch their head and realize that this isn't going to have a good ending for Donald Trump.
I think those are all really important reminders. Joyce and Claire stick around. Ryan Riley had to run off to do more reporting. Our thanks to him for starting us off.